Thank you, Susan. Thank you, everybody. Happy anniversary. First and foremost, I want to just acknowledge Susan's outstanding leadership, her stewardship. You know, it's interesting. Every couple weeks, we get together, all the city department heads, and we every week get together in smaller groups. But as a group, 60, 70 of us get together, and it doesn't matter what the topic is. Susan will chime in and make sure she raises her hand and say, "Oh, wait a second, did you consider the rights of those with mobility issues, the rights of those that are visually impaired? Did you consider your responsibilities, your obligations, moral and ethical and legal as well, to include this and to include that?" So I just want to give a big round of applause to Susan and her leadership and stewardship of this department. She's outstanding. I want to acknowledge the other departments. I see a number of department heads here, and Ed Lee, Ed Reeskin, and others that have been doing great work and trying to lead the way and lead by example in terms of fulfilling our mandate, to fulfill our promises that we made some 20 years ago. It is extraordinary how far we have come, but it's equally extraordinary how far we need to go. And I want to underscore that we understand that. We understand that we are not there yet. We understand there's still discrimination in the workplace. We still recognize there's still accessibility issues on our own streets and sidewalks. Heck, there's even accessibility issues in our own San Francisco Board of Supervisors chambers, which still have not been made completely accessible. We recognize our rights. We also recognize our responsibilities. And so I want to just begin by making that point. I also want to make a few points about Ed Roberts, because it is absolutely right to remember that in 1962, it was Ed out here in the San Francisco Bay Area that led the way. And so much of the progress that has been made, all not only around this state, but this nation and around the world, can go back to the work he initiated and the leadership he displayed in the 1960s. Don't forget, it was extraordinary. The headlines of the day, these were the headlines of the day when he was accepted to UC Berkeley. The headlines read, "A cripple is accepted into Berkeley." That was acceptable nomenclature. That was acceptable headline writing by the editors of local newspapers. That's how people were referred to. But it was because of his commitment, his constancy, his faith, his devotion to the cause of true equality that others started to come out, and others started to join, and others started to organize, leading to 1977. And many of you may have been there, in UN Plaza. And how appropriate, UN Plaza. Remember, the birthplace of the United Nations. It started here, and the full promise of the United Nations all began here in San Francisco. And there, many of you were 100+ strong in UN Plaza, with the largest demonstration this nation had ever seen at the time, of people who said, enough is enough, and we're going to demonstrate our right to demand that our rights are extended. And people paid attention. And in so many ways, that was the cataclysmic movement, or rather moment in time, that really woke people up, so that some 13 years later, we woke up the nation when 3,000 people strong came out in Washington, D.C., Democrats, Republicans, independents, regardless of party lines, and we got the Americans with Disabilities Act signed by then President Bush at the White House lawn 20 years ago today. So it is remarkable, those origins. It's remarkable, the progress. It's remarkable, the work that all of you have done. Now, I was putting together, if you've ever watched, and maybe you don't want to, or never, maybe you had to, I'm never good with notes. I got my own learning disability called dyslexia, so I can't read very well. But I thought it was important to make Susan's point, and I'm actually doing something I never do. That is, I wrote some things down because I wanted to get this right, because I wanted to underscore what Susan just said about the last 6+ years. You know, when I first became supervisor, some of you may know, I hosted a little reception over across the street. And I wanted to celebrate the fact that I had the privilege of a lifetime to represent the people of San Francisco, and I was told I couldn't do it because I was at the green room across the street, and apparently it wasn't accessible, which was rather remarkable to me because as a small business person, this same City Hall made sure appropriately that when I opened my small business that it was accessible, only to find out when I came here that the same people that were telling appropriately small business men and women like myself what to do, they weren't doing it themselves. And I remember coming together and cobbling up a few bucks, and I said, well, that's ridiculous, because the city came in and said, well, we'll take years, it's an historic structure, all kinds of issues. And I just smiled. I said, boy, that's the same thing I hear business people say all the time, but we make them do the right thing. And so let me, if you can't do it, City Hall, I'll do it myself. And I actually wrote a check, and we put that temporary ramp, which, by the way, has now been made a permanent ramp that's still there today, and made that chamber accessible. My point of saying that is not to impress you, but to impress upon you that I recognized when I got here as a supervisor, we had a lot more work to do than I could have ever imagined. So when I had the privilege of serving on the board, we worked to get more ramp taxis. We worked to focus on making sure the Olmsted decision was made real. And we worked to make sure there are more accessible buses and pedestrian signals and the like. But when I became mayor, I had a little more leverage. And we had the benefit of Susan and others. And so here's just some of the things that we've done, just to highlight the point. We started with voting, because there's no more principled thing there. You know, in 2004, we made some progress, but just north of half our polling places were accessible with accessible voting equipment. Today, I'm proud to say, we're not 100%, but 95% of all the polling places now are accessible with voting machines that people can use in private, which is good. We didn't stop at the War Memorial Building, because in 2004 we had this great transition plan you all worked on. It looked good in writing, but we hadn't implemented that plan. In fact, there was only a negligible amount of progress. Today, 6 years later, 80% of that plan is now complete. All city offices that provide services are now made accessible. All museums are now accessible. 90% of our community health clinics are now accessible. Because of the good work of Luis Herrera, 14 brand new branch libraries accessible, 9 more that are in progress being worked will be made accessible. Most modern accessibility of any library system that I know of in this country. I remember when Willie Brown went out there, I'll never forget, we had a big celebration when we had our first playground that was made accessible, and that was some big national news. Now we have over 80 playgrounds that are fully accessible, 28 clubhouses, and 19 rec centers. That's real progress compared to where we were just a few years ago. Still not good enough. We talked about Olmsted, and we talk about, and Susan was right to bring up, it's appropriate, IHSS and home support services and what's going on in the governor's budget. I don't want to get too partisan or political here, but it's pretty unconscionable that it's even on the table, these kind of cuts. And then again, not surprising with all the other cuts that are on the table from CalWORKs and Healthy Families and adult daycare and the like. But you know what? You don't have to worry about those IHSS cuts here locally. They weren't even part of the discussion and dialogue with the budget for all our shortfalls and challenges. We didn't even begin to enter into that process to make sure that we're providing the quality care that people deserve with quality wages and quality benefits. So I just want to thank everyone, IHSS and our consortium, for all their great work and their stewardship and allowing people to live in place and live in dignity, which are the principles, I think, that bring us all here together. And it was a principle that brought us together to create that community living fund a number of years ago. Not everybody needs to be in an institution. Not everybody needs to be, as proud as we are of Laguna Honda, not everyone needs to be at Laguna Honda. And we need to provide alternatives to skilled nursing facilities. We need to provide cultural competency and being able to deliver that care in the neighborhoods. But we had no funding and we had no framework. Now, 5 years in a row, $3 million a year we've been putting into the Community Living Fund to allow people to transition if they are at Laguna Honda back in the community, or to stay in the community again, to live in dignity and live in place. I want to thank Susan and all of you for that Community Living Fund. It is a national model today. People forget emergency planning. Susan never did. I remember we updated all our emergency operation plans, the disaster council. We hadn't met in 8 years. The emergency operations plan hadn't been updated in 8 years. There was Susan front and center saying, that's great to update them, but make sure they're accessible. At the time, only 3 of them were accessible. That was a challenge. Today, we now have 75 accessible emergency disaster shelters that are accessible, and 37 of them can be adaptable and made accessible. That's real progress. We had only 1 audible alert system. Today, we now have an audible and visual alert system through Alert SF. If you haven't signed up to the text messaging and the benefits of Alert SF, please, if nothing else today, sign up for Alert SF. Call 311 for information. Sign up. Alert SF is, again, a national model. Real progress has been made. This is good. It's all up there in real time. So I want to thank everyone for that work. 2 final things. Public right of way. I know we've had to be sued over and over and over again. Amen. Sometimes you're happy to be sued because it gets you focused, realigns your values. So I'm not acting like we were real leaders here. You were the leaders holding our feet to the fire. But here's the good news. 5,100 new curb ramps in the last number of years have been done. We've all but doubled them from where we were in 2000, over 12,000 curb ramps. And I got to tell you, it seems like we're really fast tracking through the good work of Ed Reesk and everyone else, because I don't know if there's a corner in the city where we don't have some construction on a new curb ramp. So I think I hope real progress is here, and I hope Bevan Dufty's here. I know how committed he is to this, and I want to just, if we can, acknowledge him and his work on these curb ramps, and thank him, and thank all of you for holding us and making us honest in all of this. Final 3 points, because I know you're sick of me, and you got a lot of speakers. But it's important to talk about, because you're important to talk about. In addition to the curb ramps, we only had 1 intersection that was accessible with those pedestrian signals. Now we can confidently say that we lead the nation with 116 intersections, and growing every single day. Please give yourself a round of applause for that. It's always good to lead the way. We got more work to do, but we're making progress. Transportation. I know it's still not, I get it. Man. I did that taxi task force. Remember that one? A lot of you served on that. I'm looking out here. Look, we've increased by over 25% the number of ramp vans, or ramp taxis. And we went from a system of accessible buses a few years ago where there were only 409, and we've close to now doubled the number of accessible buses in our system. That's good progress. Again, we still have a lot more work to do. We had no digital voice announcements a few years ago. Now every single one, they may not always be working, but every single one of our buses are equipped now with that technology. So good progress has been made there as well. And I hope you acknowledge that, because boy, we love to beat up that MTA, and we love to beat up Nat Ford and the folks over there at Muni. Incidentally, they had the highest on-time performance in their history last quarter. Unfortunately, that bar is pretty low, but nonetheless, it was the highest we've ever seen in history. So a round of applause to those that get beaten up all the time at Muni for a job well done. Final point, because Susan's going to pull the hook. Housing. Big, big issue. Toughest issue of all, affordable housing in the city across the board. I don't know if you know this, in the last 7 years, we've built more affordable housing than any time in our city's history. It's still not even close to enough. In the last 24 months, things have slowed down. But we had a run there of 5 years, unlike anything we've seen. Here was the good news. Because of your work, we modernized the codes and our requirements. Over 3,100 units are fully accessible or adaptable. And we have 862 that are currently under construction. This is an order of magnitude increase from where we were a decade ago. So we have not forgotten our obligations on the housing. We haven't forgotten them on transportation, on rights of way, on streets, on pedestrian signals, on being prepared for emergencies, on all the work we need to do to lead by example here. And yes, until they kick me out, in fact, this will be a requirement. I know a lot of the board wants to get rid of me as mayor, but here's the deal. I will not go until they make their chamber accessible to people with disabilities, and that will be the final big effort we engage in. Thank you all very much for your work. Thank you, Susan Misner. Thank you to all the advisory committees. Keep up the good work.